Okay, right. Well, I think we've given lots of people a chance to join. So thank you, everyone that has joined in. Really appreciate you being with us today. I think we are really pleased to have you with us. I think before we get started, I've just got a couple of bits of housekeeping so that you know how to participate today. The structure is around 10 pieces of advice that we hope are really practical and that you can find useful straight away. But if we do breeze over something that you'd like us to go deeper into, or you'd like to ask a question, you can do so at any time. There is a Q&A button in your Zoom control panel. You can use that to submit a question to John and I. And as time allows, we'll either answer them as we see them or Q&A at the end. And we've left quite a bit of time for that. And we're also providing a free one-to-one follow-up session with all of you individually as another chance to grill us or get some further advice on your own specific challenges. You can book your session for that by going to the Qrious website. It's at qrious.co.uk/121, which is the numbers 121, and we'll put that link up at the end as well. And one last point to say is that we're recording this, and I'll provide the link and the slides after the event to the video. Right, with all that being said, let's take a moment to introduce ourselves. So I'm James, this is little Ben, who's in the house at the moment. I just want to acknowledge that we're all at home today, so apologise if there's any background noise or interruptions. I'm Innovation and Strategy Director here at Qrious. My job is to help all our clients figure out how to make the best use of design and technology to improve their business. And I've been doing that for about 15 years now across all kinds of sectors, including retail and housing and not-for-profit world. I'm really pleased to be joined by my friend John from Campbell to Kell. John, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself?
Good morning, everybody. My name's John Slade. I'm a director with Campbell to Kell. We're a management consultancy based in London. We work throughout the UK and Ireland. We work with housing associations, sports and leisure bodies, charities, commercial organisations, contractors, legal firms, care providers, a real broad range of organisations and sectors. And we work on a whole range of things: business transformation, digital transformation, strategy and governance, finance and business planning, risk and assurance, mergers and growth, human resources, and we've got a very busy recruitment team as well. And I lead for Campbell to Kell on digital transformation, which is why I'm here today.
Awesome, thanks, John. And for those of you who don't know Qrious, just to introduce what we do slightly. So we're an award-winning experience design studio based in Newcastle. And our mission is to use technology and design to simplify people's lives and create a better, fairer digital economy for everyone. And broadly, there's three areas that we help people. We help you figure out how to best take advantage of those tools. Our bread and butter is creating modern websites, apps, and digital services that win over customers. We also help businesses rapidly grow and mature their own digital teams by providing experts that can augment your existing teams, advice, and the space to try out new ways of working. Now, enough about us, let's zoom out a bit. So we're talking today about accelerating our digital plans. I thought this was a really interesting bit of data from the World Economic Forum. It's the amount of money globally that different industries are spending to try and take advantage of all this new technology. And the reason I say the race is on, I think in every industry, the race is between the big incumbents who are trying to transform, spending a lot of money, as we can see, and all the startups and disruptors who are trying to achieve a similar kind of scale. So in banking, the perfect example is, will any of the high street banks create a digital experience that's as frictionless as Monzo, for example, before Monzo reached the scale of the top 5 high street banks? I think that question is being asked in every single sector. Cisco actually last year did a piece of research. They estimated that 40% of the top 500 global companies are going to die in the next 10 years because they fail to take advantage of this quickly enough. Now, that kind of made me think as I looked at that this morning, in the next 10 years, well, that feels like a long time away, and certainly even longer before this global pandemic happened, all kinds of new pressures now on businesses to digitize their processes, reduce costs, and recoup lost revenue as fast as possible. Forcing everyone to consider how they can accelerate this. But accelerate how? Well, let's take a look at what you all said. So when you registered for the event, we asked, in what ways are you trying to accelerate? Now, I'd love to ask the person who said something else, if they're on the call and willing to share, you're welcome to pop it in the chat. No worries if not. But a couple of things that I've taken away from this feedback. Firstly, is an appreciation that digital is clearly such a broad priority in business today, and I think that's reflected in the wide spread of answers we've received. And we've tried to tailor our advice today accordingly, so that you hopefully get some advice about each of these. But the second thing is about making the case. Like getting buy-in from everyone does often seem to be a major stumbling block to moving at speed. And we often see it, that kind of leadership is missing, or the business case is missing, or the kind of company-wide orchestration that's needed to make an ambitious initiative succeed is really tricky to pull off. And that's actually our first step out of 10. So I kind of wanted to share my favorite example. And I'm going to start with a quick show of hands. So I'm just going to put a poll up, and I hope this works. So you should all see a little poll which allows you to say whether you've been, if you'd like to share, whether you've been to Disney, and if you did, whether you enjoyed Magic Band, or whether Disney's not for you. And one person has already said that. That's fair enough. Okay, I'll just give people a couple more seconds. Brilliant. Okay, thanks everyone. So a few people who not interested in Disney, so apologies in advance for talking about them for a couple of minutes, but I hope it's still relevant. And actually what I'm seeing is there's a couple of people who have used Magic Bands, and everyone else has either been or not, but has not had the chance to use the amazing Magic Band, which I'm really in love with. I'm just going to end that poll, so thanks for taking part in that. So I'm really in love with the business case for Magic Band. It is just the perfect blend of customer needs and business needs. So if you think about yourself as a potential customer at Disney, as a visitor, what are some of the things that you want? Well, you don't want to queue for rides anymore. You don't want to be constantly thinking about how much things cost. It's expensive enough. And you maybe want to give the kids or the people that are with you some freedom of choice to spend and do things, but in a bit of a constrained way. And from Disney's point of view, what do they want? Well, they need data about how to be more efficient, set the most optimized prices, and assign resources and workforce in the right place, and reduce staff costs. They've got an enormous burden when it comes to handling cash, actually like physical money throughout the whole of Disney. And ultimately, less time queuing means more time for customers to spend money elsewhere. So they created this cashless, wearable travel card, essentially. You can put money on it, you tap to pay, tap to reserve your place in the queue so you can go away, spend more money, and come back when it's your turn. And it arrives weeks before you go. It's personalized. Kids go bananas and wear it every day. So it's free advertising as well. So I just think it's an extraordinary case study. And it wasn't a startup. It was an internal idea. It didn't require some separate additional innovation unit or R&D unit to be created. It was just a team that understood the power of design and technology, made a really strong business case, and inspired everyone to go ahead with it. And the reason I mention this is because often the business cases I see only look at growth, or only look at marketing effectiveness, or only look at cost reduction. And I think it turns out that often the best customer experiences are also cheaper to deliver because they're based on efficiency and customer convenience. So my recommendation is to really look for ideas that do it all. Don't be content with an idea that just looks at revenue growth. Try and make it cheaper as well. Okay, so let's move on to step 2, right? It's all very well and good making the case for change, but clearly if you're not making what customers want, then you're not going to get very far. Now we're talking about working at speed today, so I wanted to recommend this guidebook from the fantastic Erica Hall called Just Enough Research. And it's chock full of really rapid techniques that you can use to validate any assumptions you're making about customer behavior. you can take the time to understand their thinking and include people that might ordinarily be left out of your research. It's full of diagrams like this that give you suggestions about the kind of research you can use quickly to answer different kinds of questions. And one example I wanted to give that I'm a really big fan of is rapid ethnography, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's so valuable and it's so easy. It essentially just means spending a few days watching customers in their natural buying environment. So in a context of buying a house, for example, a new build house, it just means a researcher asking if customers wouldn't mind if they joined them while they look around the showroom. They're just going to watch their reactions to things, listen to the conversations they're having, asking why they're doing what they're doing. It doesn't take long, but it's so valuable. And the kind of insight that you can get doing something like that means that you can really bring customer insight into the process and do that throughout. Now, just because you're working fast doesn't mean that you shouldn't be ambitious. I think John's going to talk you through our step 3.
Sure. So in terms of making things transformative, for me, I think it's possible to delete and lose the majority of potential benefit from the very outset if you think that all you need to do is replicate your existing customer service model in a digital environment. So for example, if your service is currently configured around person to person, where people are phoning in and speaking to someone, or they're seeing someone face to face, then you've got a considerable distance to travel to achieve new digital customer journeys. And I'll give you an example of that. If people are phoning you to make an appointment, what they would like to do is they'd like to book an appointment online and have be able to select the slot that suits them online. If you limit your ambitions to enabling them to request an appointment online, then your back office journey, your back office work, all you've done is add a new access point for that request to arrive. You haven't re-engineered the back what goes on in the office at all. And of course, it's relatively straightforward now to set up working methods that enable the customer to make the appointment and book the appointment online. And what we often see with clients is that they close down lots of the potential benefits that they could reap from digital transformation through a lack of ambition, and also a lack of willingness to think about re-engineering how the business works. What they focus on is what the customer will experience, but they don't put into the mix how the business actually works. And so it's really important to go into a project like this with an open mind about what will need to change. Putting it another way, to make a good dish, you need the right ingredients. In terms of the method that Qrious use, they know that their recipe works. And the key ingredients for that are a willingness to reimagine how you do business, top-level support, but so that this is a business transformation, not an IT department project, a focus on how you can do something rather than why you can't, support from your enthusiasts, and the involvement of your best skeptic. But I'll say a bit more about that later on. Back to you, James.
Brilliant, thanks, John. Now, you might be thinking that doing this big transformative work can't be achieved at speed. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with the concept of a minimum viable product. You kind of launch with the minimum effort and risk necessary to test your idea with real customers, and that's absolutely our recommendation, right? It is definitely the most effective and fastest way to bring digital ideas to market. But to John's point, if it's more ambitious, you're going to be changing potentially many parts of the business at once. And so the question becomes, how do you orchestrate that at speed? So what we suggest for our step 4 is that instead of thinking just about the minimum product, you think about the minimum team. And I'll take buying a car as an example, which is something I did relatively recently. Now, clearly the idea of having a test drive, sitting with a random salesperson for 20 minutes, even before coronavirus came along, is not particularly customer centered. If you were to just think about the minimum product that you might want to test, you might say, okay, we're going to try some virtual test drives, or we might give customers an enormous amount more information when they book so they can trust the process a lot more. But if your team, if your project team for doing those things is just the digital delivery team, just the designers or the developers, you could end up with customers being greeted by a sales force who are grumbling about how their conversion rates and their commissions are now all messed up. And the trusty sales scripts that they've always used no longer work. And they're having to collect data that they've never had to collect before. And the customers are suddenly way more savvy about finance offers and they weren't expecting that. So your minimum team will often need to include some kind of representative or liaison from HR, from sales, from finance or legal. And where we've seen this really work is that the digital teams are able to bring those people in as early as possible, share the sense of urgency and speed that you're working at, make them part of the delivery team too, right? Let them share in the success of every launch and release. There's a great way for making that orchestration a reality. So now that you've kind of made the case for change, you decided what you've got the right people involved, you've listened to customers, you probably have a ton of ideas. I'm sure you already have a ton of ideas. In my experience, it's really a lack of imagination about what you could do with digital that's the challenge. It's more of an execution issue. It's choosing what to do first with limited resources and not inadvertently wasting too much work or money on an idea that turns out not to be right after all. I speak to a lot of charities who are in this position. Right? Every single department wants to take advantage of digital budgets to make change. And they want to invest in digital fundraising. We need better online support for our service users. We need massively improved digital marketing. Everyone seems to be wanting to build a volunteer app. Yeah, our recommendation is just to add a very simple step in the process that hopefully changes these conversations. And the trick is to convert your ideas into hypotheses. It doesn't matter how much research you've done or how watertight the business case is. We really recommend you do this step and convert those ideas you've got into hypotheses. And this works really well as a kind of cross-departmental workshop. Just bring those heads together for a few hours, capture all the existing ideas and opportunities that everyone wants to exploit. That's your first column. And then you just dive into them a bit and look at the hypotheses or assumptions that you're making behind them. Then what you do with this big list of hypotheses is you just score them quickly, right? How quickly could you test that it's definitely true? And how much business impact would it have if you did it? So now you've got a big ranked list, and that's how we recommend you decide what to do first. And the ultimate idea is that instead of departments competing for large budgets to run big siloed digital projects, instead, you've got your minimum teams and working at high speed, trying to validate each hypothesis as rapidly as possible. And if an idea, proves it really has legs, then you can invest a bit more into it to see how it performs at a larger scale while getting on with the next hypothesis. Now, to be fair, this is easier said than done in a complex organization that already has an existing kind of budgeting process. And maybe John, over to you on that.
Yeah, so I think that the idea of the egg and spoon race it can be helpful here, because in an egg and spoon race, you're quite keen to win, you're quite keen to get to the finishing line, but it's really important that you don't drop the egg. And we've all had experience of IT projects that have definitely dropped the egg. Particularly, I think that the old way of doing these sorts of transformations, where you'd write a really detailed specification, there would be tons of work done to work up that into a big solution that was then implemented with a big bang. And our experience of that approach is that it's always late, over budget, and underperforming. And Qrious's approach is very different. As James has said, so from my perspective, what it does, it distills your key objectives. It works out the most impactful minimum viable service or product. It quickly tests and implements that, and it learns lessons from how that goes, gathers more intelligence, and builds out from that starting point. So by testing small hypotheses, it eliminates the risks that you've seen play out in big bang implementations. And even if some of those small hypotheses fail, they're going to fail in ways that don't break the business. Another thing about the method is that it's rigorous in identifying and monitoring key risks, so that the business knows that what's going on within the project isn't going to hobble the business at any given point. The method also includes the role of a chief skeptic. So it's really easy for these project teams to get very buzzed up and very excited, and for a confirmation bias to start to build up, where everybody believes that everything's going to be fantastic. And the role of your chief skeptic is just to continually to try to break the plan, to find the weaknesses and to challenge the confirmation bias as it arrives. So in these ways, the Qrious approach is very different from the more familiar approach of leading up to a big bang implementation. James.
Thanks, John. I think one of the things many of you said is that you'd like to accelerate your modernization of all that legacy technology that you've got, and we see this so often, right? Our clients and you on the call, you've got a vision for this brilliant digitally enabled customer experience that you want to deliver, but either maybe the IT team doesn't work in that way, or you haven't been able to yet make the case for upgrading all the old platforms and software that you believe is necessary to enable it. So I'm just going to do another quick show of hands at this point, and I think you should all be able to see that question now. Just want you to think about the technology that you currently have available within your organization. Where on this graph would you describe it? So is it right at the start? You're only just thinking, yeah, there's something happened and we need to invest. Are you using something new and really enjoying it? Or have you used it for a while and thinking, oh my goodness, this is nowhere near what we need? Have you had something for a while and you're starting to take advantage of it? Or are you in the plateau of productivity, which is the brilliantly named area where actually, you know what, this technology is perfect, it's completely fit for purpose, and I'm really enjoying using it. So let's just see. So we have, I'm glad to see a couple of people are on the slope of enlightenment. That's nice. No one yet saying they've reached the plateau of productivity, which I think is not completely unexpected. Okay, so what we have, I'll just give you guys another couple of seconds. Right, so I think what we're seeing is about a third of you at that technology trigger, right? Believing you're at the point where you definitely need to invest in something new. And then another 20 to 30% in the trough, unfortunately. And actually then the remaining kind of split throughout, either in the peak or in the slope. So I think that's really helpful context. And yeah, sad to hear that no one has reached the plateau of productivity, but I can understand why. So I think the first thing to say for us is that we don't actually recommend implementing any new technology until you've been through the kind of steps we're describing. Right? You don't need a big new technology stack to test a hypothesis or get something new live to customers. And generally, we find that if you spend more on technology, what you get is a bigger technology bill. Right? And that's coming from an agency who get paid to implement technology solutions. Now, clearly, this is extremely context specific, and I'm sure all of you on the call have your own context, as I say, as to exactly what you think is needed. But in the first instance, when we're talking about accelerating your plans and using this kind of approach, we'd recommend simply using whatever technology you have. Understand the constraints of it early on so you can shape the idea accordingly. Often what really helps is getting in touch with the people who made it, whether that's the platform vendor or your internal team or an agency or whatever. Tell them what you're trying to do, and likely they'll be able to share some tips for making it happen without doing the big upgrade, although they will sell you the upgrade, I'm sure, but you can leave it for now. And I think if you get your idea live and working and you're seeing some business KPIs move with imperfect technology, then you've got some real numbers you can use to make the case for further scaling and to make that change happen. But yeah, our advice would be to not let it get in the way of getting something to customers as soon as possible. Right, step 8, the New South Wales problem. Now, this brilliant quote explains the New South Wales problem. Now, aside from Victor being a Marie Kondo fan and the local government having a Minister for Customer Service, both of which I love, the problem described here is just really common in all kinds of organizations, actually particularly common in successful digital organizations. Right, and the scenario is that you've empowered teams across the organization to take advantage of digital, to get things live to customers quickly and use existing technology. And you've removed all the barriers and bureaucracy that used to exist for going to market online, and 1,000 flowers have bloomed. But you've also inadvertently created a huge and highly fragmented digital ecosystem. You've got loads of duplication, you've got confusion for the customer, and because things aren't joined up, you've also often got unnecessary marketing spend driving new traffic to everything individually. So there's one really simple thing you've got to do first to get past this. It's just to take the time to review everything you have online. Right? Just make an index that's visible to everyone in the business. We call it an ecosystem map. We do this all the time for our clients. It doesn't take long, but it's hugely valuable because now you can see where your new idea should live or what it should be connected to, or whether it already exists, which does happen, and whether you can build on top of something and what you in turn can signpost. So it's a really simple step, but it is missed 99% of the time. So do let us know if we can do some digging for you and create a little map. It's really, really helpful. Right, penultimate step. And this is actually more of a summary, actually. So we talked about quite a lot of work here to make your initiative a success. How to speed things up without missing opportunities. But I wanted to show you how you might organize all of this into a really high-level roadmap. Now, clearly, this is highly simplified, and it's very context-specific to exactly what you're trying to achieve. And there's surely a lot of work that needs to be done before you even start this to get leadership and the team on side about taking this kind of approach. But generally, this is the kind of timeline that we've seen be successful. Right? Agree the business case, get people together, get those department leads together and agree what that hypothesis backlog is. Start talking to customers, and that continues throughout. Decide what the team needs to be. Appoint your chief skeptic that's going to try and break the plan and understand what the tech constraints are, and then start making the idea, right? And figure out where it should live. And as soon as possible, see what customers think of it, and then feed that insight and data back into your hypothesis backlog, whether you need to continue with it or whether it's time to look at something else. So hopefully that kind of brings the idea to life for how you might massively accelerate an existing project or get that new product or service launched or upgraded, optimized, and so on. I'm going to hand back to John to have the final word.
Yeah. So if you go back 6 months, and we were having this same discussion, it would have been our experience with some clients that they were locked into the idea that the only way to manage the risk of a bodged IT implementation or digital transformation was to write a massive spec and to move at a slow pace and have a big bang implementation. COVID-19 has really, really changed that context for organizations. So when we talk to exec teams in organizations at the moment, they're incredibly excited about what they've learned about their organizations over the last 3 months. They've moved at pace. They made things happen quickly. They launched their online service offering, their remote working service offering quickly and with a minimum service offer. They got things moving and then they built out from there. And what organizations leaders are saying to us is, how do we preserve that moving forwards and stop the old way from reasserting itself? And so the approach that Qrious take to digital transformation absolutely mirrors the experience that organisations have just had during COVID-19. So organisations have learned that they can move quickly, that they can manage risk in a different way. They've learned that their staff have got the capacity and the capability to move quickly and the enthusiasm for it. And so this approach considerably predates COVID-19. But what COVID-19 has done is it has opened up the eyes of organisations to their ability to change quickly. And this, the Qrious approach in terms of digital transformation, enables you to repeat those experiences. And what's more, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because this approach done well, at the end of it, those who've participated are really excited, because in a short period of time, they've got something really useful out the door. And so the enthusiasm for repeating it exists, both in terms of the people and in terms of the business, because it can see the benefits straight away. So it's just, I mean, it's been a really tough time for businesses. And I've not spoken to, you know, how incredibly challenging it has been. It has been. But it's also opened up possibilities about how to move at speed. And this approach very much takes a similar approach and has demonstrably been successful in other places. James, back to you.
Thanks, John. Brilliant. So I hope that's been really helpful and practical. Here's our summary of the different steps that we suggest you take. And I think, you know, as I say, we'll be sharing these slides around afterwards. I just really appreciate the time for everyone joining and listening. So if anyone has any questions, then they are really welcome to join. I'm seeing one question from Laura that's come in on the chat. Thank you. If anyone else has any questions that they want to add to the Q&A, or even just to make a comment to say which of these 10 steps you'd like us to go into any more detail on, then yeah, now's the time to please send them our way. While you do that, I'm just going to read out a question from Laura and Nick. Sorry, John, I'm going to just read this out so you can hear as well. So I find that week one, or step one, is at times the most challenging, in the sense that, especially at a higher level, different departments and people push very individual agendas. How would you identify that neutral figure who helps build hypotheses in a balanced manner? That's a really tough question. I think sometimes it does take an outside facilitator to bring those teams together. But you're right. Ultimately, there is some leadership needed at a higher level in an organization to help make the case for working in this way. I think the other thing is that, we were talking about this in terms of the minimum team earlier, is you want to try and find those people that are enthusiasts and energizers, rather than those that are blockers or are going to get in the way. Now, ultimately, you know, if you find that you want to work with, I don't know, you're going to need to work with legal, but there's no one in the legal team who is going to help to advance this agenda of working in this way, and just doesn't see the benefit of working at speed rather than working slowly, then you're right. You have a bigger cultural problem in the organization that needs to be kind of examined, and it can take some higher up leadership to make that case. I think where I've seen it work quite well is that there is a clear ladder of KPIs between the most the most business driven goals, well, that's increase revenue, reduce costs, increase profit, get more market share and so on, and then further down to the individual departments or the individual projects that might be going on in those departments. Where I see that the different departments are pushing their own agendas is that ladder hasn't been joined up, and it's not obvious to everyone where they can each contribute to those KPIs at a higher level rather than staying down in their own KPIs at a lower level, if that makes sense. John, do you want to
Yeah, sure.
add anything to that?
So I guess my observation would be a couple of observations. The first is that you might want to try and move answering that question into the project rather than having it as a question that the business needs to determine before it specifies the work, because within the method we're really good at working out which is the optimum from the long list of wants, because we all know that once you open Pandora's box, everybody's got an opinion about what's in Pandora's box. Suddenly everybody, it's going back to the point James made about working with charities, that every charity can come up with a list of 15 diverse things they'd like to achieve. Which one should you do? Well, I would say try not to write the specification that lists all 15, but try to write a specification which says we'll form that list and then prioritize it, because we've got the expertise and the method that can do that. Yeah, I think that's probably how I would approach it.
Thanks, John. So I'm gonna look at the Q&A. We've had 3 questions asked. I just want to check that, John, that you can see these as well.
I can.
Okay, so let's see if we can go through these in turn. So, question: the role of leadership and culture in achieving change at pace. Yeah, clearly, I think we've just touched on it there. But there's a fantastic book by Lisa Welchman called "Managing Chaos," which I can highly recommend. It's been a guidebook that I've used plenty of times, and it's essentially about digital governance and how you bring together different teams to achieve great digital outcomes. One thing I've seen work quite well is a change canvas. So this is a framework that that we've used sometimes in a kind of workshop context, and what I can do is I'll include the change canvas into these slides when I share them later, so you can see what it looks like. But what it does is it makes people think, and in exactly the way John was describing, as part of this project, what kind of change might we need in the organization to achieve it? So it addresses it head on. And it says, okay, given what kind of an organization we are and what we're trying to achieve, in what ways might we need to think differently? In what ways might we need to connect more emotionally with our customers? In what ways might we need to change our behavior or our governance processes? So again, it's just a tool, but it just means that you are empowering the delivery team to ask those questions and feed that back into the team, into the wider business as part of making the project a success.
Couple of observations from me. Well, one on leadership, one on culture. In terms of leadership, absolutely crucial. Can't be an IT-led, department-led issue. Can't be a digital team-led issue. These are business issues, typically, one of the changes that will occur, if you want to reap the biggest rewards, there needs to be a change in thinking away from business processes, which often function within and across existing silos within the business, to thinking more about customer journeys. So how do you create a journey that is short and beneficial for the customer? And then how do you need to re-engineer the business inside the way the business works in order to fully exploit the opportunities that are offered? And you absolutely need senior level support and drive to make that happen. In terms of culture, that's a really interesting one. I think we would back ourselves that, first of all, if we can put the right team from the business in place, it will be relatively straightforward for us to understand the ways in which the existing culture will or won't support the piece of work that's going to be done. The project then needs to acknowledge those opportunities and challenges and work with them and address them, and in order that the project moves at the pace that it needs to. And quite often what that involves is holding a mirror up to the organisation and saying, look, you've commissioned this piece of work. If these things are going to move at this pace, we can't, we're going to need quick decision making. And so if you're telling me that this thing's got to go through 2 levels of approval and that the minimum time that can take is 8 weeks, that's in complete contrast to the piece of work you've commissioned, which wants the thing in use in 6. So we just need to work through those sorts of issues with the organisation.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I think that's really well described. So Victoria is asking, how would you recommend weaving intelligence and understanding of different habits and needs of different segments of the population into your digital offers and solutions? E.g., some groups won't engage with different things for financial reasons. So I think, again, this depends on exactly what the goal of the solution is. But I can maybe give one example that I've found making this quite successful. It was working with an automotive company. And the issue they had is that dealerships across the country have very different audiences, and different cars that they're selling are marketed at very different types of audience. So how do you go about choosing which audience to start with? How do you make sure that you're not just creating a service that only some niche of your customer base or your potential prospect base is going to actually engage with? And the way we did this was through massive transparency with the whole of the organization about what we were trying with different groups and seeing exactly what was working. So we created and it really didn't take a huge amount of work, but we just created a simple dashboard that said, okay, we're trying these, these are the initiatives that we're trying, and these are the different audiences that they're targeted at. We can do it at a local level, and we're going to try, for example, I don't know, with this particular car range that's aimed at this particular audience, we think their needs are around this particular service or solution. Right, we're going to test that really quickly, and then we're going to share that intelligence in terms of how well it succeeded with the rest of the organization, with all the different dealerships countrywide, so that they can say, oh, I've got customers like that. Brilliant. I'll, or I've got a challenge that's similar to that. Brilliant. I'll take that and I'll try that as well. So I think if you are going to be testing lots of different products and services with lots of different audience groups, and you're doing that as quickly as you can, in order to make that scale across your organization, I think it's really important to have a mechanism for sharing your results and sharing exactly what experiments and tests you're doing, so that everyone else can take advantage of it and you're not becoming kind of the only bottleneck for delivering solutions of that kind.
I could talk about this for about an hour and a half. This is the social housing question for me. Historically, for the last, let's say, 10 years, when I would try to have the digital transformation discussion with social housing organisations, more than 95% of the time, the first point that was made to me was, what about the people who aren't online? And the second point was, not many of our customers are online. And the second point is simply fundamentally untrue. It was untrue 10 years ago, and it's even less true now. And for me, in social housing, the service models that most social housing organisations have, they are built around the needs of the most needy 10% of customers. And the largely silent majority who've got much more straightforward needs, they have to express those needs and achieve service via a whole service model that's designed around an assumption that they'll be in some way naughty. So they're either not going to pay their rent or they're going to misbehave in terms of their tenancy. And so the way I look at this question is that what digital needs to do is to, in terms of social housing, what digital needs to do is to address the needs of the silent majority, and to create ways that group of people who are online and who buy their home insurance, book holidays, car insurance, utilities, they manage all of that online. It's to enable them to do that with your organisation. And there's a massively clear business case for doing that in terms of reducing the cost to serve. There is then the question of what about those for whom that will be difficult, either because they're not online or because they live lives that mean and there are aspects of their lives that are going to make that difficult for them. That's an absolutely legitimate question for the business to deal with. And indeed, it needs identifying and dealing with. I'm not sure that if I was going to do a digital transformation, that I would give that task to the digital transformation team to solve. I think it's an absolutely vital question, and you might want to have it within the realms of this project, but it would change the shape of the project somewhat. I would say, I would put to the business the question, how are you going to understand what proportion of your people you think you might need to make alternative arrangements for, and then start to think about what those alternative arrangements might be. And there's loads of, there's various approaches that are out there. There's likely to be far more personal contact. You may offer those people person-to-person access routes that you don't offer to the majority. So you may choose to offer those routes on an exception basis to a much smaller number of customers.
So I think that provides me with an excellent segue to, and Sean, will answer your question in a moment, but I just want to highlight that this link here, qrious.co.uk/121 is a place where you can go now or later to book a follow-up session with us to kind of go into more detail on any of your challenges and just ask any more questions that you have that haven't been able to be answered today. We're really looking forward to doing that with all of you as you wish. Now, Sean has asked a question: how would you take a step back to look at your needs whilst still having a complex digital setup already in place that is not working and is deemed too hard to deal with? So I'm going to try and answer this with another sort of anecdote example, with a piece of work I did with a large university a few years ago. And it's essentially, my answer is about expanding what I said about having a service index and that ecosystem map. Because if you've got a really complex digital setup, then you're probably not too dissimilar from that New South Wales issue. You've got lots of websites, you've got lots of services, lots of inconsistency in terms of what's working and what's not, and what technology is there, and what's actually meeting customer needs or not. Probably loads of different back office tools, wide variety of marketing effectiveness, and ultimately as well, perhaps, you're missing customer expectations about what they, are used to seeing when they're interacting with an organization of your kind. So what we did for the university was we began by creating that index, right? We began by looking at all the different content and services that the organization provides online, right? What kind of technology do they have? And we found, 3 or 4 different e-commerce platforms in use. I think we found like 6 different CMSs being used across different colleges, and different departments were using different things, and some of them were kept secret, and some of them were officially hosted, and it was just a really messy world. But having that index allowed us to go, okay, we've got, I think there was something like 200 or 300 different services and products that they had online. Everything from allowing students to pay their rent or pay their fees, through to applying for financial aid, applying to join the university for a course or an online short course. We had it all listed. And that allowed us to kind of zoom out and start to categorize them according to what actual customer needs there were. So say, okay, we're going to talk to customers, and by customers for the university, that was students, staff, alumni, teachers, etc. What are their needs? We're going to have this here, and then over here we've got what we have at the minute. And let's just do a bit of a mapping exercise that goes, okay, in what ways are these areas meeting the needs at the minute, and which ones are falling short? And from that, it's actually not such a big step to create a vision for the future ecosystem. So I kind of described, doing that index that says this is the as-is current state. If you map that against what we know those different audience needs are, then we can start to create a more inspiring vision for what the future, joined up digital estate might look like. And that allowed them, that gave them a mechanism for moving forward, rather than being a bit, oh my goodness, we've got so much to do. There's so many different things that are missing, and all different teams are working hard, but we're not moving fast enough. Sometimes just needs an outsider to come in, say, okay, this is what you have at the minute. This is what the needs are. Let's pop them together and start to plan out a way forward.
Yeah, I just make the observation that I think the way that Qrious work is the antidote to the problem that you describe, in the sense that all too often, faced with the situation that you describe, what organisations do is write a massive specification that specifies what they believe to be the solutions to the many problems that they see. And it creates very large, very slow-moving projects, which ultimately, the statistics show, don't work. And the Qrious approach, what it does, it absolutely doesn't ignore the big picture. What it does is it takes cognizance of that big picture, but then distills down to what would be a small but impactful change that could be made, and it gets on with making that change and then building out from there. And so it overcomes the problems that we've seen time and again, where everybody scratches their head about IT and feels that nothing can actually change because it's all just too big and too complicated. And the Qrious approach inverts the way that that's addressed. It acknowledges the big picture. It takes time a short period of time to understand what that is, but then it moves forward on a small thing and builds it out. And it's a different approach that demonstrably works.
Well, thank you, John. I'm glad you agree. Yeah, I think we really, really appreciate all your time and questions today. Thank you very much for joining us. As I say, we're going to provide the video of this and the links to the slides later today or tomorrow, so that you can share this with others as you wish. And as I say, really encourage you to go to that one-to-one link, and yeah, please do book in a session with us. We would love to talk to you more about how we can help with your specific challenges that you've got in your organisation. So all it leaves me to say is thanks very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very
Thank
much.
you. Bye.
Thank you.